Hi Fox, how are you doing? Let us see an interesting game from the round 6 of this Tata tournament. A really cool draw, and the result doesn't mean it was a boring game. No way. We had Domínguez with white and Nakamura with black. So there we go. Interesting game we're gonna see today. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, the Ruy Lopez, and Knight F6. Now Nakamura has a very wide opening repertoire. He can basically play almost every theoretical line, just like he says, just play something, play chess. So well, he plays very much this E5 move. He plays lots of Sicilians. He has also played French, Karjakin. I've also seen him playing Scandinavian D5, so lots of moves he can play. And okay, they go into this absolutely main line with the queenless Berlin endgame, and Lanier, the Cuban GM, plays h3, which normally will involve an early advance of these kingside pawns, trying to get a quick initiative here on the king side. This is an interesting plan in the Berlin and very fashionable lately. Bishop d7, rook d1, pinning, and king c8, getting out of the pin. Seems a strange move order, but it's very theoretical, and in fact, well, the pieces as we're gonna see now are going to be placed a little bit weird, but it's very straightforward. Now g4, knight e7, and now knight g5, attacking f7 pawn, and bishop e8, defending it. Now these are logical, sensible moves, but pieces look really weird, bizarre, and certainly classical development rules do not fit here. So f4 here, white is not developing his queenside, but is advancing kingside pawns, and b6 is sensible to make a room for their king and help the rook on the corner on a8 to get into the game. Also h5 and h6 have also been played here by black. Now f5 and h5 right now, and really developing the rooks this way through these h5 a5 moves seems to be pretty normal in some Berlin games. I remember some games of the World Championship match in which Magnus Carlsen played both a5 and h5, and the rooks were almost already playing, developed without moving from the corner. So king g2, protecting these three important squares so that after exchange the rook cannot get in. c5, d4 square was going to be important for black. He could potentially put the knight here and have a strong square there on d4 protected. Knight c3, g6, and here we got well, black had a couple of options. For instance, bishop c6 check seems not natural, but after king g3 the pawn on f7 is once again hanging, so doesn't seem to be that great. Instead, knight c6 was another possibility, just attacking the pawn on e5 and while giving possibility for black for the bishop to go to e7. Now bishop f4, bishop e7, knight f3, and well, black has less space but seems playable. It doesn't seem that bad. Instead, g6 was played, which is certainly committing because f6, and now this pawn is going to be a headache for black. Of course, taking knight takes and the weak pawn on e5 is going to favor black a lot. This is not good for white in any way. So f6, knight c6, and now knight f3. Now, point is, after e6, knight takes, it was interesting to play this move order. Now knight c4, and the point is really not that black has that bad position, but he doesn't have many useful moves. He probably has to move the knight, which already seems the best place to piece. He can't move no bishop. Rook's moves would be kind of silly, so black position may not be that bad, but it's certainly uncomfortable. So, for instance, you can't play king b7 because f7 and the bishop is trapped. So Black would be in an almost sux-1 here. This was an interesting move order, playing e6 right away. But knight f3 was played here, and now knight b4 attacking, and Lanier is going to let that pawn and let Nakamura have that pawn and develop, take the tempos to develop. Bishop f4, knight takes c2, and rook ac1. Knight goes back to b4, and the cost of the pawn. White has improved his development and will try to have activity, initiative. Black has a bishop pair, but although so far it hasn't been very important. The position is more or less closed. He hasn't have that much development, so he basically has to try to catch up on development and to not give up too much space. And also he'll have to be careful with these pawns here, which are far advanced and could create some problems if the break can be made in a proper moment. a3, knight c6, knight e4 to go probably to g5 and advance, help the advancement of this pawn, which is more or less the main idea of White's position, playing on the king side with his pawns at coordinate. Bishop d7, attacking the pawn. Knight eg5, attacking at the same time the pawn on f7, which now is not guarded by the bishop. H takes, and Hikaru rolls the dice. Bishop takes g4. This is certainly a very nice variation and double-edged position. Probably engines may say this is not good for black, but you'll have to have the guts to play this, and this is certainly an interesting variation. Now knight takes f7, and the rook is almost forced to go to h5. For instance, going to h7 may seem reasonable, but now e6 protecting, and if bishop takes e6, knight eg5 protecting, knight fg5, sorry, from the third rank to g5, protecting the knight on f7 and forking the rook on the bishop, and black is losing material. So it wasn't that easy to move the rook. The only reasonable play seems to be h5. Now king g3 attacking, the bishop takes, goes to f5, could have taken, take, but now knight d4 check, king g4, and well, black has lost his bishop pair, but the knight is well placed here on d4, or also on e6. It could be very nicely placed, so blocking that pawn. So it doesn't seem very bad position, although these connected passed pawns could be a little bit dangerous. But okay, Hikaru didn't consider this, or at least he didn't play this. He went to bishop f5, just holding the pieces for the time being, and well, see what happens. Now the knight goes back from c to g5 to advance that pawn. The difference being that if he puts the other knight there, he's letting unguarded this d4 square, and black once again has the possibility, although it may seem strange or weird. Nothing is weird in a Berlin endgame, so knight d4 is a possibility once again. And now, well, this knight is very well placed. So after this, bishop h6 and e6 was played. Now you got a piece of passed pawns here connected on the 6th rank, and certainly black must be very, very careful, because this could turn into a white victory very soon in a couple of moves if black is not accurate or careful enough. Bishop takes, and knight takes, and now basically black is forced to give up the exchange, like the way Hikaru is going to do it. Otherwise, these pawns, as I said, are very dangerous. And this is an interesting exchange sacrifice. Rook takes g5, bishop takes g5, and now bishop takes e6. You give up the exchange, but you have 2 pawns in return. Remember that other pawn that the knight took on c2. And now, well, the position is interesting. Black has a little bit more. White has the more or less the material advantage. But if black coordinates, he should be able to hold. The only nice point, well, apart from the material, is this f6 pawn. It's a passed pawn favoring white, but there we have a couple of opposite colored bishops, which makes the game more probable to be a draw. But anyway, very interesting position yet. Rook e1 and attacking the bishop. Well, but it seems that b4 was very interesting here in this position. trying to take advantage of the knight on c6, which is not guarded. Of course, taking is not an option. This is 1-0. So king b7, for instance, and here b takes c5, and it seems that black has to try to create compensation, counterplay. He cannot just stand there passively. He will have to play something like rook h8 to try to go in, to check on h3, etc. Even giving back the pawn, he could recover the a pawn. Instead, for instance, if he just takes back, rook takes c5, and white has lots of activity, and black lacks compensation, counterplay for the material, and this should be good for white. So this was an interesting alternative, the b4 move. Really not that usual for a top GM to not play these interesting moves. So instead he played rook e1, now knight d4 defending, and rook cd1. Once again, before, it seems interesting to attack black forces roots, I mean the basic defensive structure of black, which is this pawn structure. This seems to be interesting once again. And after rook cd1, the bishop goes to f7. And really not that easy to... I mean, white is already threatening to take 2 pieces for the rook. For instance, king b7, just getting out of the pin. Rook takes, and now white has a very strong passed pawn on f6 and a piece for 2 pawns, and must be one for white. f6 is extremely strong, really. Instead, getting out, protecting the knight for the bishop with the king, for instance. Bishop e3, attacking the knight, which is now pinned. Bishop b3, rook d3, bishop c4, rook d2, king c6. Now bishop takes, and once again, this seems good to be too good to hold for white. I mean, this is material advantage, and the position is more or less clear. There are not that many pieces, and black doesn't have that much coordination really to hold the game. So bishop f7, correct decision, not to give up to 2 pieces for the rook. Now bishop e3, knight f5 check, king g4, and king b7 played here. Taking, white would have a crushing position now. This rook and the king on the back rank are a target. Now white could be threatening rook to e7, advance that pawn, and well, as I said, the back rank is also an issue. If white exchange a pair of rooks, this is basically over. So here white would have a crushing position. That's why Hikaru doesn't exchange. The knight is protected, so he goes king b7. Now bishop f4 with some threats to go, for instance, with the rook to d7 and attack at the same time the c7 and the f7 points. King c6, avoiding that. Rook h1 with similar ideas to go to the 7th rank with some attacks on the bishop, on the pawn on c7. Rook f8, rook h7, knight d4. We're seeing that this c5 move by black early in the game is very useful, because this knight is going constantly to this d4 square, and it is really strong there. A very nice piece. And rook f1 here. Lanier just can't find the way of winning this. He just he's been just turning here and going here and there with the pieces, trying to create the win, to find the victory, but he's not been able. And now black is more or less forcing the draw. If bishop e5, knight e6 probably would be played. So after rook f1, bishop e6 check, king g5, and now bishop c4 with the tempo. And here, well, players more or less force the draw. Rook takes c7 check, king b5, and now rook f2. And after knight e6 check, it's a 4, king g2. Black is taking material back, and the draw was agreed here, because after bishop takes, this is an absolutely drawish position, opposite colored bishop, and it is very, very difficult, but for any player to lose or to win this. Otherwise, if neither of them blunder. So An interesting draw here, where it seems that Hikaru was on the ropes, he had to more or less lose. He was in a very difficult position in a queenless endgame in this Berlin variation, but he somehow held the draw on some interesting lines, and well,